Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Okay, tell me if you can identify with this. The challenges of leading people while also trying to maintain a relationship with them and actually care about these people and their families. It's a tension that every leader faces, especially leaders in the church world, those doing ministry. And my guest today, we interview our A's, B's, and C's, administrators, bosses, and churches. And my guest today, David Gomez, falls into that C category, into the church world. He's the district superintendent of my district of the Christian Missionary Alliance. So he oversees a 4-state area and about 50 churches. And that area includes the state of Texas. So he's got just a jumbo-sized area. And he has to lead not only his office staff and his support staff there that work in Dallas with him, but he also has to support these 50 churches and their pastors and sometimes their boards. He's working directly with the church boards who are local people who live in the community but are serving the church and helping lead the church. And he's got to do that through good times, through growth and encouragement, and through bad times when things maybe don't go as planned. And David's interview was a real joy to conduct because the principles that he talks about with leadership really show his heart, that he cares about people and holding everything in an open hand and letting God just kind of lead you and guide you to new experiences and leading in a different way than maybe you would have chosen. So if you find yourself in that world, in the church world, in ministry, and struggling with caring for people while also trying to lead them, then this interview is for you. So I hope you enjoy listening to it. I know it'll be a blessing to you. Here we go. All right, everybody. Welcome back into the Leading Lounge. Thanks for joining us for another episode. I've got a special guest in person, live and in person with me. In my office today, my district superintendent, David Gomez. So, David, thanks for giving me a few minutes and sharing some wisdom with us. I'd like to start, if you could just tell us about yourself, tell us about your professional journey that got you to where you are today. And you could probably assume that people don't exactly know what a district superintendent is. So maybe you can enlighten us a little bit on what that means too.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Justin, for inviting me in. I'm excited for what the Lord has in store for what you're doing here. So yeah, just excited for you. I mean, about myself, I can't start telling you about myself unless I sort of introduce. Listen, I'm married to my wife, Irma, for over 25 years. We have 3 young adult children and who are, by the way, starting off their journey as adults, and we're excited for them. Our oldest just recently got married, actually. So apart from the grace of God, I could not be and do what I do without them. So I just want to make sure that I mention that. Mm-hmm. I actually started my professional journey in banking.
Really?
So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So right after college, I got what I thought was the ideal job for me at the time. You know, I always wanted to be in banking. I thought a lot of my friends were going to need money so they could come to me, you know, and we could, you know, help them get to wherever they need to get to. So I was excited about that. So that's where I started my professional career. But it was also at that time, my early 20s, that the Lord began to sort of engage me about ministry, not necessarily about being a pastor, but just, you know, about serving him. And I frankly didn't know what that looked like, other than that's where he was kind of leading me into. So fortunately, I was a part of a small Spanish ethnic church. And I think this is important as I lay this out, because a lot of people were involved in, as they are for all of us, that kind of helped form us. So yeah, he just had this, you know, view of ministry where he wasn't afraid to develop and empower.
This is your pastor you're talking about?
Yeah. Our senior pastor at the time. So he wasn't afraid to develop and empower young leaders like me to do ministry. Mm-hmm. And it was really one of those organization environments of what I describe as less is really best. And I know we don't usually think that way.
You're saying less in terms of what?
Well, less in the sense of, people, resources, because the need that's there. So there's a need when there's less, right? The need for mission fuels innovation, fuels development, it fuels faith risk, because you don't have enough.
You can't trust in all your resources.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So I really, and I say that because I think whether your organization or your church or whatever it is that you're doing, when it's small and it's kind of wrestling things out, it's really a great place to be for development and innovation and risk to happen. Right. And I think we see that business wise, we see that in church, we see that in a lot of areas. So I was given a lot of opportunity to not just serve, but unleash my passion and my vision for ministry on various fronts. Children's ministry, youth ministry. I was a church treasurer. I mean, I did all kinds of stuff.
And this was you're in your mid-20s, like you said?
Yeah, it's about mid-20s. Yeah. I shared with you and your elders last night about the story about taking the youth to life, right? The Alliance, youth, National Youth kind of story. Conference. And again, that's an example, right? So how do we take these 20 youth who are really, again, South Texas, where I grew up, Mercedes, Texas, a low income part of the country. How do we take these youth whose families really couldn't afford to send and make this investment in their own kids to this awesome conference that life is, which I had experienced years before, and I wanted them to experience as well. And so just having the vision and the passion to take them, and we bought an old bus, like I told you, 25-year-old bus. we rigged it up, to put house units in it and, all this kind of stuff, and took a mechanic with me, and there we go down the road. Now, mind you, it was from South Texas to Orlando, Florida.
Yeah. Long trip.
Yeah. Long trip. And, and it was not just, the conference was awesome, like it always is, but it was more than just the conference. It was the vision, the passion, the prayer, the risk, that I think, not just, as far as my experience, but even the experience of those kids who, by the way, today, a lot of them serve as part of the core team of the local church that we were a part of. So at the time. So anyway, talking about my professional journey, I think all of these things come to play. The church also began an English ministry. So it was a Spanish ethnic church that began an English ministry, of which I was part of a small core team that led its launching, right? This new English ministry. And so we were trained by a lay leadership kind of program that they had at the time, which, by the way, is getting relaunched in the Alliance in the coming months, from what I hear. And so we were kind of formed with that, and we were given opportunities to expand our ministry as far as, church was concerned. And again, I'm working throughout this whole time. So I'm a volunteer. So it's not like...
Right. You're not getting paid to do all this.
Right. No, I wasn't. So, but I was praying about seminary. By this time, I knew the Lord wanted me in ministry. I didn't know what that looked like, but so I was praying about seminary, and eventually went to DTS, Dallas Theological Seminary, which I'm grateful for the training I got there. And another important piece is that the church invested in my wife and I as we went financially.
Oh, wow.
So I say that because I think sometimes when we see the potential of leaders in our churches, especially today where we're finding less people engaging in ministry training, professional ministry training, a lot of it has to do with, is the investment worth the return, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
So how do we help these people that we identify as leaders to really get the training they need, right? Knowing that on the back end, it may not be as financially convenient for them to do that. And again, I'm not saying that everyone needs to go to seminary. That's not what I believe, but I think that that's a piece that other people play an important role in that. And it's part of what we're doing now as a district leadership, right? We want to co-invest with churches in their own leaders so they can get trained, like the LEAD program that we have in our district that you're aware of. So anyway, so at seminary, we didn't just go there to study. My wife and I engaged in local church ministry while at seminary. And so we led a young adults ministry.
So this was, sorry, you left South Texas, physically moved up to Dallas?
We did.
Okay.
So this is like 525 miles away.
And did you have kids at the time?
We didn't.
Okay.
So we started having kids.
Gotcha.
Soon after that, while at seminary.
Okay.
But, as we engage in local church ministry while at seminary, I say that because engaging in the work is always, it's always a key component, right? So we don't want to just grow in theory of whatever you do in leadership, but in practice.
Right.
And so, we did that. And again, we focused on a few young men and women that we developed in leadership that caused even that ministry to grow the way that it did. And so, that became a big part of us at the time while we were in training. Again, just a focus on developing people. People's always is always the investment, not anything else. It's always about people. So, and then after graduation from the seminary from Dallas Theological, I was invited to go back and serve my home church. So we did that and spent 20 years there, 20 plus years. And then we got opened up to this opportunity of the district superintendent, which we're enjoying now. And that's kind of been our journey of where we're now at. So
for folks not in the Alliance or not familiar with maybe a church structure, can you just give like a 2-minute summary? What does the district superintendent do now? What are you doing now?
So my role is to oversee a region of churches of the Christian Mission Alliance. And I mean, it involves both the governance side and the ministry side. So how do we resource, help serve our churches, our pastors, our leaders to be able to do what they've been called to do locally? And so there's a lot of training of caring that is done for pastors and their leadership and the congregation itself, that we do. So there's a lot involved with that. But, short terms, that's what we do. We kind of oversee these 50 churches in 4 states, and we try to give them resource them and help them as they, put their own mission and vision for local ministry together.
Gotcha. So I can imagine one big shift for you so before you were the DS, you had always worked in the local church scene somehow, right?
Right.
I mean, since you left banking. So I can imagine one big difference is you go from you're on the ground, a lot of close relationships with people, to now you're in more of kind of an oversight administrative role. So you've got 50 churches spread out over 4 states, including the small one of Texas. So how do you now maintain relationships with these 50 pastors and other lay leaders in churches while still trying to balance all kind of the administrative demands of that job?
Yeah, a couple of things with that. I mean, you're right. The geography of 4 states, including Texas, is a big challenge. But even more so, the diversity of our work. So there's 11 churches, 11 languages, 11 different cultures that we serve. And then we did that, when we launched this, if you recall correctly, it was in the midst of this COVID pandemic that the world was facing. And so that was a challenge as well.
Yeah, you had all of, a few months under your belt before COVID hit?
No, actually, it was COVID had just hit. So August of 2020 is when I came into this role.
Oh, that's right.
So
that's
yeah,
right. You came in the middle of it, literally in the middle of it.
Right. So we were just beginning to figure out what this, whole world pandemic was all about. So yeah, it was
wow.
It was something else. But as far as relationships, I don't know if you've heard of Dave Ferguson's Bless Rhythm.
I don't think so.
It's a small book that he put together, which is really good. It's about 5 ways to love people and change the world. And so, I think that's one rhythm that I try to implement to my own personal, just lifestyle, really, from home to anyone else. but certainly in the work that I do. And so I basically it's five different things. So be in prayer for people. Obviously we're engaged with pastors and local churches, and I make a phone call periodically and have conversations and just to see where pastors are at and their leaders, and we're in prayer over those things. So, right, this acronym BLESS. So be in prayer, listen, it's the L, listen well. Huge when it comes to cross-cultural leadership.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm the first to tell you that I can be ignorant about a lot of things culturally. So, which is good to know, right? I mean, I need to listen to people well.
Yeah.
And try to see things from their lens,
Mm-hmm.
Which I will never get to see completely from their lens, but at least listen so I can lead them where I can as best as I can. So, and by the way, I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have in this role to just really be very conscious of that people are different, their experience is different, their cultures are different. And even though we're all using the same manual, in the case of us, the church manual, the Bible, those nuances are real.
Right. And you're not showing up with a black and white, here's the way you need to solve this problem.
Right.
You're showing up and just listening to how they view it, how they approach it, how they see it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And be able to lead them from that point of view. So the other thing is eat. So bless, right? BLE, the eat. So I tend to thrive in the informal. I get it. Formal structure is necessary, and we all have them in whatever organization we're part of. But I really try to be the guy you can hang and just connect with.
Right.
Just kind of what I tried to do yesterday with, when we got together with some of your elders.
Oh, yeah.
It's an informal. Let's just eat. Let's just.
No agenda.
Yeah, no agenda.
Just sitting down and getting to know one
another.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all on the same team kind of thing in some way. So eat and then serve, right, is the first S. This is what I try to make my posture, to just, I'm here to serve. I'm here to help you do what God's calling you to do.
Sounds almost like Jesus.
Almost. And it's something that actually we talk a lot about in our office with the team, right? We're here to serve our churches and those that we're to care for. So
yeah.
And then the last S is share. How do we need to do these first four things before we can get to share vision or strategy or structure when we're asked to, or when we're wanting to dive in there with them. So, I mean, when I think about relationships, those are, how I tend to at least want to approach in building relationships with those that I'm called to lead.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I've never heard that acronym, but I like it.
Yeah. One other thing that I would say with this is that I trust my team and I deploy them. I mean, I've told you this before. I really love the team we have at the district office.
When you say the team, you're talking about, that works at the district office.
Right, right. So we have a church advance guy, we have a church planting guy, and then our admin, accounting, and all the staff that's there. So I don't hog the spotlight and the authority.
Right.
I think that's important. We have a team, we're leading a team. So another big thing for me that I think of often is, and I say it to those that I'm under, is I'm a big believer in, if I have a responsibility, I also want the authority to be able to make decisions.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of lead my team that way. I obviously they have responsibility, and I give them the authority to make decisions when they need to make decisions. And so I think that's important. And like I said earlier, I do stress with them also the posture of service. And yes, we have responsibility and authority to help in whatever way we can, but we want to always serve. So,
yeah. Well, and I'm sure I see that as like two steps. If you have, what was the word you used? Trust my team and deploy them.
Right.
So that bless rhythm, the more you do that, the more people learn that they can trust you and that you trust them. And then as you release them or empower them or deploy them or whatever, and give them that authority, now you've given them kind of all they need to really thrive in the task they've got ahead of them.
Right. Yeah. I think in a sense, you're building relationship.
Right.
I mean, that's what that's all about. Right. And so being able to create the right environment and the conditions to be able to really build some solid relationship with those that you're working with, I think goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, good stuff. So you've got the relationship piece, which that was all very helpful. I'm going to steal that acronym and use it. Another aspect of your job, I know, is not just kind of maintaining and building relationships, but also responsibility. So you've got the relationships of your staff, your team that you're talking about. Then you've got the relationships with guys like me, pastors in your local church who are hundreds of miles, maybe more, from El Paso to Arkansas, maybe 1,000 miles or more away. I don't know. How big is that? Is that 1,000 miles? You know?
from where to where? From
Well, is there any 2 points in the district that are 4-digit miles away?
yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
Yeah. So you could have people spread over 1,000
Yeah.
plus miles. And then church board, like you mentioned, you went and you ate dinner with my elders last night. So
Yeah.
and all those, I'm sure you could have different demands put on you or competing demands at the same time. So as far as giving advice, giving some wisdom to other people who are juggling different demands, how do you balance all those relationships? And how do you personally prioritize where you spend your time when you've got these different relationships all kind of competing for your attention?
Yeah. Let me take just a slight but big step back,
Okay.
right? Because there's a lot happening when someone's leading, right? And a big part of that, there's this cliche that you hear often, right? God, family, and work. But I want to point that out because it's also a healthy biblical principle. I'm always aware that if I'm out of whack with that, God, family, and work in that order is out of whack, then everything else is going to fall apart.
Sure,
So,
yeah.
And again, how do we balance that and then manage the time spent over the rest of the things we need to do? So for me, I think the way that you kind of lined up that question is right. So staff, pastors, and boards, church boards, right? And I think for me, I would say they come in that order.
Okay.
Leaders in good situations get to choose their team. And I know that's not always the case, but I would encourage, in particular, church leaders, church boards, to remember that as we talk about this. But you figure that be the case, and it is the case in a lot of, a head coach gets a job, he kind of brings his coordinators and that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
So it's the same thing with the pastor. The pastor in the best situation gets to bring in his own staff, and so I have been graced to do that in the district office.
That is good.
So and in the previous job that I was at as well. So we're a team, we're a family. We believe in what we're called to do together, and so that's always important. So they are a priority to me.
Uh-huh.
The staff is. I genuinely care for them. Their well-being of their family is important to me.
Kind of like your work family. Sounds like
absolutely.
It.
Yeah. And one of the things that I found out about myself in Strengths Finders that I did years ago is that I'm a pretty adaptable guy, and you're probably figuring this out as you hang out with me. But so I'm very flexible with my staff, and I think today's technology allows us to be very flexible.
Almost forces you to.
Right.
Yeah.
So when there's a need, like yesterday, our admin, we were in the middle of a meeting, and she gets a call from school. Her daughter tested positive, and now she's going to be out for a few days. And so, go and do what you got to do. And as long as we keep the focus on what we're trying to do, which again, I have a great staff, but we're able to do that. So, we have check-in meetings as a staff typically every Tuesday. So other than, this is about where you're at, you as the part of the team, and how do we kind of collectively work with you on whatever you're doing. So it's that we have those kinds of meetings, we pray for each other kind of thing. So my staff, certainly a priority. Pastors then would be my second, though a church in our context as a denomination, churches get to call their pastors, but the DS, the district superintendent, appoints them.
Okay.
So I feel a responsibility to care for those that I appoint.
Sure, yeah.
So they become people that I put as a priority to care for. And I've appointed several, obviously not everyone. Some were already here, and so it's been a journey to begin even the blessed rhythm that I was talking about earlier, to kind of work those into every one of our pastors in our 50 churches.
Yeah.
But that's an ongoing goal, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how do I build that so we can have that relationship, and, we can care for them, and then they can trust us as an office or as a superintendent as well.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
and then the last one would be the boards. I mean, not that I mean to put them last in the sense of, but in your question, I mean, boards are obviously people that are very much, church boards are overseeing the local work, which is significant. Their work is significant locally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think now that COVID is mostly behind us, I'm just getting into rhythm of wanting to meet with them, mostly in an informal, relational way.
Right.
I get it. You're the DS and that kind of stuff, but it's always, for me, more comfortable when people feel like there's a camaraderie between me and them as we're trying to just get the mission done locally.
Right. As opposed to, watch out, here comes the boss.
Right. Yeah. So how do we build that relationship that way? So.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. So one of the focuses of this podcast, and a particular interest of mine, is on communication. So every guest I have on, I like to ask them a few questions specific to communication. So this one I ask everyone, and I always enjoy the stories that come out, because everyone likes to hear about people's failures. And everybody can identify with those things. So tell us about a time when you failed at communicating and what you learned from it, and how did it change your approach to communication, if at all?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to actually share a very recent one with you, but let me preface that with something that comes to mind, and that is that one of the things that is very important for any leader is to grow in what now is being called relational intelligence, right? So I have learned that I am mostly a visionary, missional person.
Mm-hmm.
So I can easily see the big picture, but many times people need to be communicated the details, and I struggle with that.
I do too. The exact same way.
And if we're going to move the mission forward, the ball forward, many times people need to know, they need to see the details. So I am constantly, needing to, and still do to today, to surround myself with process people to help me communicate that.
Yep.
So most recently, for example, I communicated a relatively tough decision to a group of leaders that initially hit them like a brick. And quite frankly, it was not an easy blow when we let them know that. And so we hadn't quite worked out the details yet, right? So of how we're going to work through that. And so it was then that Aaron, our advanced specialist guy on the team, who is a great process guy.
And he's if anybody's listening, has already listened to these podcasts, I interviewed him before I interviewed you, so people may be familiar with him a little bit.
Right. So yeah, Aaron's he's a great part of our team. Really excited about what he's gonna bring into the district through his expertise and what he knows. So, but he put down a detailed 90-day plan to get this leadership team where they need to get. And when that was communicated to them, I mean, listen, we had unanimous buy-in from the people in. So sometimes I think what I'm trying to say is that I think it's important for a leader to know themselves. And sometimes because in communication, you have the detail person and you have the big picture person.
Right.
And so you need to have both. Otherwise you're going to be stuck. And a lot of pastors and leaders have one or the other. Rarely, I think, you have both.
Right.
And so surround yourself with people that can help you wherever you're weak.
Sure. I'll say an additional challenge from experience is if you're in a situation where you are wired a certain way. I'm wired exactly like you. But if you follow someone, you talk about picking your own team. If you follow someone who's wired differently than you, or worst case scenario, the exact opposite than you, and you step into that team, then you almost have to not deconstruct it, but you almost have to think, okay, now I have a bunch of people who think just like me. How can we make sure we get the details out? So we don't just get a whole bunch of abstract, big picture stuff, and people go, okay, but what do you want me to do?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's valuable. And I think you can even see that in just the way church is described in the scripture, right? So we are a diverse, gifted group of people.
Mm-hmm.
So we need the different aspects and perspectives and giftedness and functions in the church. I think in leadership in general, right? I think,
Mm-hmm.
and so being aware of how you're wired and what you need around you becomes crucial in communication.
Yeah. And I think that's true not only of yourself, but your expectations of others too. I had a scenario where someone expected me to be all things, expected me to be a detail guy and a big picture guy, be excellent at this, but also excellent at that. And so it put me in a position I felt where I was constantly going to disappoint them one way or the other because you give me a big picture, you give me details, I'm gonna fail every time. So
Right.
not just knowing yourself, but having those expectations of others of knowing, okay, this is your strength right here. So I'm gonna lean into your strength, ask you to bring that out, use that as much as you can without asking you to or expecting you to do these things over here that might not be in your wheelhouse.
Right. Yeah, that's good advice. Absolutely. Yep.
Well, one other question, David, I like to ask everyone is if the present you getting grayer every time I see you.
Yeah, no kidding.
If the present you could visit with the younger you, nice jet black hair, what advice about leadership would you give yourself?
Yeah. I'll go back to what we were just talking about. So keep growing to know yourself. And maybe even more importantly, embrace your limitations. So sometimes, as you were mentioning just now, people put all these kinds of expectations on you that, you really can't fulfill
Right.
because you're not wired that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if I were to speak to my younger self, I would remind myself of that your limitations are not a bad thing. It really just points to the fact that you need to empower those who God has given you to make the mission better.
Mm-hmm.
And so connecting with those people and embracing those people, which, by the way, sometimes they're going to have a different perspective. And if you just learn to empower them to do it, then they're going to make you even a better leader.
Yeah.
And like I just mentioned a few minutes ago, it really is a reflection of the holistic ministry of a diverse, gifted church that God has given. We're to do this together with other people who God has gifted and called and put in ministry to function with you.
Sure.
So I think that would be what I would remind. There's a lot of years that I spent trying to be, like I think a lot of people, trying to be what I'm not.
Right.
Because people put those expectations on us, right?
Right.
Like you said earlier. So.
And you don't want to disappoint. You want to live up to their expectations
Right.
as much as you can.
Yeah.
So, yeah. No, that's good. Good stuff. Another question I like to ask everyone is any lesson, if you could pass on one lesson to our audience today, what would it be?
Yeah. So if you were to go into our living room today in Benbrook, Texas, where we live, my wife and I, my wife took this frame and, she cropped on it these words that say, live your life with your hands open. And that actually comes from our engagement time conversation. When we first got engaged, we talked with each other about living our lives for the Lord, for God, with our hands open. So don't grasp onto something that, too strong that you're not willing to let it go.
Right.
But hold everything, lightly with your hands open. So my wife and I, as you know, coming into this role, we were talking about this earlier in our conversation. We left a really good place with really good people in our previous ministry to take on the role as district superintendent. So the ministry then that we had, 2 years ago was what we had always hoped for and prayed for in ministry. Really, we had great relationships. Ministry was thriving, all these good things, right? And it doesn't mean that we didn't have challenges, but really really enjoyed what we were doing. And so in the middle of that is when this invitation to take this role came on, which this was not part of my picture anyway.
Right.
After 2 months of wrestling that out with God, about what do I do with this kind of thing, God reminded us of this phrase that I'm telling you about, right? That it's to live our life with our hands open. We took that step. We really felt like we don't want to hold on to something. And I actually literally thought about, am I capable of holding on to something that if I do, it's either going to affect even the very thing that right now we are fond of and we love, and even put maybe crush the potential ministry of others in that location where we were at, because we wanted to stay and not leave,
Right.
And so those kind of things were in my mind at the time when I was praying through this decision. And so I think, yeah, I would tell people who, in whatever role you're in, ministry or otherwise, live your life with your hand open. And obviously a person of faith does that. I mean,
Right.
we want to be able to trust God for things that are uncertain, and so that we are uncertain about, and certainly God is not. So the reality is that because of that, God has stretched and grown me in ways that I never thought I even needed.
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years.
Right.
I would tell everyone, God has a great journey for you, but part of that journey will have leaps of faith with him. And if we live our lives with our hands open, man, God will form you in ways that, you really didn't think he could or he would.
Right. Now it's interesting you mentioned that being at your house. We have over our dining room table. It took me about probably 15 years to finally get up there, but I put 10 family values. So it says at the top, as a Dubose, I will strive to, and then it's 1 through 10. And I used it to try to ingrain some values into my kids. Well, I think it's the last one is hold everything in an open hand. And, we talked about the idea of just God will break your fingers. Don't make God break your fingers to get to the thing that's, you're holding in the palm of your hand. So,
yeah.
So I know that's good. We had an instance, kind of personal experience with that. When we lived in North Carolina, we redid the kitchen. My wife totally tore it down to the studs, to the dirt, and rebuilt kind of her dream kitchen. It had a big bar, put in all the colors, all the floor, everything was just like she wanted. And then about 3 months later, we put the house up for sale, which wasn't the plan.
Right.
And so we were talking about, like in the moment, if you don't hold everything in an open hand, we would have traded all that God had for us in the future for a kitchen, for some tile and drywall and appliances, and it's like, geez,
right. Yeah.
Isn't God better than this? Like he'll give us this again if we're meant to have it. But now that we're on the other side of the move, it's like, oh man, God is so good, and trusting him there makes it hopefully easier to trust him the next time he tries to pry something out of your hand,
Right. And man, I'm glad you brought up family, because, again, I think the people that are most looking at our leadership or just our person is the people in our own homes, right? And so these values, my children heard that term, live life with your hands open on various occasions throughout, our lives together. And it's interesting that about a month and a half ago, I was traveling up from South Texas with my son, and he recently moved into, a house off campus with some other guys. And so the school where he's at, University of Texas, Arlington, he got involved with Baptist Student Ministries there. And their campus pastor person, who just has a young family and just growing his family, actually asked him, what is it, Caleb, that you think your parents did well in whatever way? And he was just asking because he wanted to sort of grow his knowledge for his own parenting, right?
Right.
And so my son's telling me this as we're driving up, and he told him, well, really nothing. So I'm sitting there expecting him to say something really like, I'm interested now. No. But he said, well, it's not so much they did, like told us to do this or that. And frankly, did we have, you know, prayers at the table, or, you know, pray with them in bed, and, you know, different things like that? We did nothing ever really consistent, I would say.
Yeah.
It was more relational in our experience. But anyway, but he did say this that really, I think, was good. He said, I just saw my parents live their lives, live what they spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
And so different decisions that we made, even the decision to move this last time, I think that's when I realized that living this, you know, this principle that I'm talking, living life with your hands open, I didn't realize how much that was really being painted clearly for him anyway.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, again, leadership, it's not just with people on the outside, but really in your own home. So,
right.
You know, God has a lot for us out there, and that He's wanting us to live out. So,
for sure. Now, I appreciate you sharing that. I know that you have a lot going on. You got a team that does a bunch of stuff. You and I talked about this before we started recording, but you've got kind of a unique mission of having these two districts that now are combined into one. And so there's a sense in which the question I'm going to ask you is, how can people find out more about the good work you're doing? But in that, I know that the good work you're doing feels like it's probably always changing and moving and whatever. Yeah, so, right. But I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell people basically where they could go to find out more about what's going on in the Alliance South Central, or how they could get in touch with you or something like that.
Yeah. Short answer to that is, you know, our website, the district website, AllianceSouthCentral.com, which, by the way, is in the middle of getting a relaunch here in the next couple of weeks or so. And then obviously our Facebook page for the Alliance South Central. I will say this, and I'll be a little vulnerable here, because I think it's a great question that, you know, others should think about, whether you get interviewed in a setting like this or otherwise. There really is a need to brand whatever God is leading you to do. Mm-hmm. And that's probably, you know, I'll be vulnerable in the sense of saying that's important to think through.
Right.
And so, you know, there's something that I'm working on right now that will come later. But this question that you're asking really affirms the you know, a good point of leadership and even service to others, that what God is leading you to do, whatever journey you're on, I think it is important to brand that, mm-hmm. you know, and so that others can have access to that experience and that learning, and maybe apply, you know, some things into their life and ministry. So yeah. So yeah, but AllianceSouthCentral.com and our Facebook page is where you can find some stuff.
All right. Well, David, thanks for driving down from Dallas to hang out with me and chit chat and enjoy it. I appreciate your leadership and the ways that you've made it a point to continue to put the mission out front, even with all these other demands. Appreciate you, man. Appreciate your leadership.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time here on the Leading Lounge. Thanks for joining us today. The Leading Lounge is brought to you by Communicate to Care, where we are building better leaders by building better people. For more information, visit us online at www.communicatetoCare.com. This is your host, Dr. Justin Dubose, and we'll see you next time, right here in the Leading Lounge.